Anna, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to actually spend time with you. I'm a massive fan, I have to say, of your work and of your impact. Effectively, you have a very important and very, very significant voice in this market. I'd love to get your bit of background on your background and experience in this market, and then I want to ask you some questions as it relates to things that are happening right now in the markets, right? So let's just start at the beginning. Can you give me a little bit of context about what you're doing?
Context about what I'm doing and who I am.
Yes.
So my name is Anna Lerner. I'm the CEO of Climate Collective. Climate Collective is an innovation network made up of startups working on climate tech or nature tech. Mm-hmm. They're all working on some type of digital innovation. So digital technologies like AI, geospatial, IoT, blockchain, any of these this family of interesting technologies is sort of what ties all of our members together.
Right. Okay. And I mean that's very humble in terms of the reach of your kind of collective, but a lot of those that you just mentioned are really impactful. Like they're transformative technologies that are actually helping us to not only future-proof, but then ultimately help to scale our markets. Can we talk about that for a second? Because I mean, like your choice around which technology you want to kind of feature here, but they're really important technologies in helping to underwrite effectively this market integrity.
Yes. No, it's a good point. And I started working in carbon markets in 2007 when I was building energy efficient cook stove projects in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
We were one of the first projects that got gold standard certification for our cook stove projects. It was really difficult to get accreditation. We never found anyone who wanted to buy the credits, so we gave them back to the donors.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's just to say that I started in project development. I then moved on to the World Bank, where I was doing large-scale climate finance and really looking at data and digital technologies as means to unlocking additional climate finance and sort of net new contributions.
Yep.
Then spent some years at Facebook, mostly focusing on sort of sustainability and the SDGs at large, really looking at partnerships, bringing the right people around the table, creating these unexpected partnerships that can be so impactful. Mm-hmm. And a year and a half ago, I took over Climate Collective. So answering the specific question around what type of digital technologies can make a difference, and right now, this is a great question.
It's a very broad one, so apologies.
No, it's good, it's good. The thing is, having been in this market for a long time, I have a deep understanding of the challenges, both that, all the actors across the value chain, and there's so many actors across the value chain, which makes it complicated. Mm-hmm. There are a number of ways that technology can help today. One thing that we're seeing a lot is this uncertainty around permanence, for example. There are more and more net zero commitments being pledged out there, and we know that we want to match real emissions with more long-term permanent removals or avoidances or reductions. That's where digital technologies can be so impactful. We don't have to guess anymore. We can actually use satellite monitoring or other types of bottom-up sensors that are tracking data continuously, granular, in real time information about these projects. So that would be, for me, particularly when we talk about this issue around integrity of carbon markets, the fact that we now have technology that helps us bridge some of the trust deficits that we have on this market, I think is extremely powerful.
And I completely agree. And I think that's a kind of a paradigm shift that's underway in the market. It's already been underway for a number of years, but it's essentially now taking hold, right? So I spoke to Marcelo Labre from Viridios AI yesterday. I sat down with Sam Gill earlier today, and I've spoken to a number of folks, Diego Saiz-Gil from Pachama yesterday, and they're examples of these sorts of companies and leaders that are essentially ushering in this kind of paradigm shift, right? By leveraging technology to provide greater clarity, but also an objective viewpoint, right, around the substance of these projects. And so, I just spoke with Alexa Kelly, and she just kind of gave the example of effectively, better data provides better decision making, and it allows effectively on the project development side as it relates to nature-based solutions, more information to make better determinations as to where to set the baseline in order to then have the baseline and credit component, right? So that there is a mitigation of an overcrediting risk. That's a really important thing. And I think that, like, this, as an example, and I'll shut up here, is essentially this paradigm shift that's underway is actually now being received at the standard. So Vera just recently launched their new updated methodology, which is in a response to this evolving landscape, effectively, of how the technology is shaping, the information and how they determine now the baselines. Before it was limited based on the state-of-the-art science that was available at that time point, and it's no different from other technologies, right? So So,
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. For
Yeah,
me, the fact that none of this is digital, I'm not talking super fancy AI models,
No.
I'm talking just like digitized project development forms. Like
Yes.
you should be able to enter information in a digital way, and then that little box on the website should kick in and say, oh, actually, we've asked for a number question and you've answered with words. The basic stuff that we have, across all other aspects
but it's
of
also data
life.
integrity and standardization and homogeneity of that data set. It was then thinking, like, absolutely correct. This is one of my pet peeves. So sorry to get on a rant here. But effectively, even David Antonioli mentioned this to me on a pod and in person, that oftentimes the PDDs become a creative writing exercise to a certain extent. And so we need standardization around how that data is captured so that we can actually compare project to project and we can actually have better decision making around how we credit those projects. And so that example of that data set piece is really important.
And I would also, to that specific point, I would say generative AI is not going to solve all of our problems in the world, but I think there are ways of looking at it as a workhorse. So there are tasks that generative AI can perform instead of us, and writing hundreds of pages of long PDD documents that essentially are, I'm not going to say copy paste, but like polling from previous thoughts and generating all this massive amount of information.
Yes.
Way ahead of knowing what the actual realities will be on the ground, how these things will come out. Personally, I would say that's maybe not the best use of people's time.
It's not.
So maybe that's where we can use Gen AI and find ways of making that process more efficient and just speed up and make it easier. Because the reality is, carbon markets are kind of exclusive. You need to have a lot of information, a lot of networks, and a lot of money to be able to afford to even take your climate mitigation outcome project and put it into a form and shape to get access to carbon markets. And digital technologies, for me, is a great equalizer. So if we can use digital tech to make access to these markets easier and better, to reduce the barriers, I think that's super powerful, particularly for all the number of communities and groups that are working on the front lines, protecting biodiversity, generating mitigation outcomes, and don't have access to these powerful markets.
I completely agree. I think that barrier to entry was an unintended kind of like a bug, but some could argue a feature of the market, effectively excluding certain participants because they didn't want too much noise. They didn't want diffuse, especially on the land-based side, right? So forestry projects tend to have quite a scale. And so you had to go over that hurdle in order to then engage with experts and verifiers to actually go and measure those projects, because essentially it's the sampling technologies at the time were just too cost prohibitive. But now you have platforms like Pachama and others that are essentially democratizing that and reducing that barrier of entry. And that's really great because then you get representation and participation from a broader set of actors that can actually help to decarbonize. And as long as we don't compromise on the quality and the integrity piece, then it's a win-win all across, right? Because they're effectively distributing finance where it can make impact. And oftentimes those smaller projects have even more intrinsic kind of indigenous community representation. They're not necessarily large landholders, etc. And you actually have those community impacts as well. So that's really important. So that's a good example.
Yeah, a member of ours called Gain Forest is doing really impactful work where they're identifying community members in these areas that have like biodiversity hotspots or ecosystem restoration capabilities, and then they're empowering them with cell phones or sensors or other ways for them to be essentially data generators, and then they're compensating that for them. And I think this is, we've had years and years of large UN, World Bank, nonprofits trying to do these payments for ecosystem service projects. And they have a lot of inherent challenges in the governance and in the practicalities and in the cost of them. Actually, we just released a report on that, so I'll put that in the link.
Yep, let's put that in the link.
And there are technologies that can help. And the reality, I think we would all agree, I would like to ask everyone here, raise your hand if you're interested in channeling more funding for the people on the front line, indigenous communities, local communities on the front lines that are protecting biodiversity and creating these mitigation outcomes. I think everyone would agree.
Yes, yes, completely.
Let's make it happen.
And I think that's really important. So that's great. Can I come back to something you just said earlier around, if I can just paraphrase here, the leverage that Gen AI can actually provide? Because as you just identified, there are tasks that we do repetitively as humans that are just not very productive. And AI can effectively create scale, right? And so I'm just going to propose a use case here that I've also channeled or spoken about behind closed doors, but let's do it in an open door environment. The work that's very manual at the standards right now around questions, answers between project developers and the standard themselves. The standard is under so much pressure, right? I'm looking at Vera and Gold Standard and Carbono and ACR and CAR, etc. We're under pressure to ensure that the projects that they actually issue, the ones that they accredit, are of the highest integrity. And so the backlog continues to exist. It's no different to when you're driving where there's a traffic jam. And that's what's currently occurring. But effectively it's because they have this insistence on this manualized process. A Gen AI could effectively help to unlock 10x, 100x potential in regards to throughput, without compromising on the quality component. Because effectively, if you had those standardized data coming through in the pipeline, and then you had systems effectively doing the actual, determination effectively, you can have humans doing the auditing, essentially, which would give you much higher scale and much higher certainty, because now you don't have subjective viewpoint. You actually have a data-driven viewpoint, right? Which is objective by nature. So do you think that that's something that could be applied?
It's a great example. And the reality, look, just putting data or technology onto a problem is not going to solve it. That's not what we're trying to say here at all. There are inherent biases in data, particularly in AI, and that's something we should all take seriously and keep working towards improving.
I think it's a tidal wave that's about to hit the just broader economy.
Absolutely. But there are responsible and serious organizations out there working on that. So let's not stop it because it's not perfect yet. Let's accept that it's imperfect, but we need to use it. I couldn't agree with you more. Humans are biased. Human actions are full of errors. We're very prone to errors. And we carry our biases all the time. Yes. And I actually had a conversation with a person sitting inside some very large Gen AI efforts this morning, and we were talking about, people are worried about the biases of AI. And we both concluded, well, it's easier to train a machine to be less biased because you just feed it with less biased instructions and less biased data than it is to train a human to be less biased. Because honestly, we all bring our own glasses from our upbringing, our experiences.
And they're entrenched oftentimes. It's really hard to often let those go. There's very few people that have the ability to effectively have that objectivity, and they tend to be scientifically kind of slanted. So it's no surprise that, like you said, that the models that they're effectively training can actually be optimized to have less bias. And it's also measurable as well. So that's interesting. Okay, cool. So we're talking about this kind of broader context around leveraging technology in its multiple forms, right? So you mentioned Gen AI, you mentioned remote sensing, Internet of Things, a whole lot of different types of technologies. What are the other things that we should all be cognizant of? You're sitting there effectively at a nexus where you're seeing all of these really incredible innovators coming together, looking at how to solve interesting problems. What should we be conscious of in addition to the AI revolution that's effectively on foot?
Right. Well, one thing I think that's kind of becoming more and more urgent, if you will, is this notion around how carbon accounting and large national pledges, like the national determined contributions that the countries have made to the Paris Agreement, and how the corporate net zero claims are starting to kind of diverge. And it's really challenging because these entities, sort of the nation states and the non-state actors, are operating on completely different ledgers, right? They're completely different carbon accounting systems.
Very much so.
Countries do their NDC pledges, which in theory, almost is also voluntary. And it's reported to the UN, and they have their own sort of data ledger.
And we have the global salt take going on.
Exactly, which is sort of the tracker of what's going on. Then we have net zero commitments from corporations, and there are obviously lots of efforts. You have the Science Based Targets Initiative, and you have voluntary VCMI that's doing a lot of important work to make sure that these pledges are have strong integrity and are of high quality.
It can be substantiated in terms of the claims that are being made.
Exactly. But somehow I feel like we're almost upholding all of these processes to almost too high standard of perfection.
Oh, I completely agree. And it's like a self-driven thing where we're like, oh, it's holier than thou. We just got to continue to try to be perfect. Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
I don't see that being applied on any other asset class. Right? It's iterative.
Right.
When I look at credit markets, they had time to evolve. When I look at commodity markets, they had time to evolve. When we launched, my team and I wrote this contract specs on the first standardized credits in the carbon market, the GEO and the NGO. Great.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Well, my pleasure. And look, to a certain degree, yes, and arguably also no. I think the liquidity is essentially kind of limited right now. But what worked effectively was building out the spot market and the underlying liquidity, and then the futures market. But what the CME folks had was this amazing pragmatism when they said, okay, look, it takes typically 7 years in commodity markets for benchmarks to become established. We think that these contracts have what it takes to become established as the benchmarks, but the market will determine it. And so they have this very pragmatic and also long-term view around how long innovation takes to grab hold.
Yeah.
And I think that's prescient in every other industry, right? You look at automotive, you look at aerospace, you look at aviation, it takes decades for things to actually be embedded. In the carbon markets, we think that everything needs to be perfect yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's not rational as well. We need to hold ourselves to account, but we also need to be rational around, hey, it's not perfect, but we're building towards perfection, and perfection looks different over time.
Yeah.
Right? Because we get
Absolutely.
new data, we get new inputs that help to shape that.
And I think that's where also, I think what you're doing with this effort of kind of bringing lots of different diverse voices together and trying to kind of surface that is so important. And I think there's so many players that could play a really important role here, that have partnerships opportunities and also that offer different perspectives. So we had a really great panel, for example, yesterday, where we had Microsoft representing a community of very brave early movers on supporting carbon markets, in this case particularly
on the CDI side as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about how they are factoring in the policy risk. We know that Article 6.4 has been negotiated for 8 years. I think Alexia told me yesterday, something insane. And we're still not there. Hopefully at this COP we'll get kind of final language, but it's taken a really long time to get to that finalization. We have 6.2, really interesting. We're seeing lots of movement from Switzerland, from Sweden, partnering with a couple of different countries in the global south to do these bilateral 6.2
Oh, I live in
deals.
Singapore, and that's evident there. I mean, Singapore's been incredible with regards to this interconnectivity between these bilateral agreements as MOUs and then ultimately ratified at the country level. It's imperative, but they're building a network. It takes time to build the network. It's so different to the old copper networks, right, of telephony. And then we just had, paradigm shifts to go to mobile technologies, etc. They're building the underlying infrastructure to enable that trading to occur. So back to the 6.2, that's happening, and that panel.
It's happening, and it's really exciting. And we asked Microsoft, how are you thinking about the risk, the policy risk, and kind of the immaturity of this system? And I am so grateful to Michelle Patron, who is representing Microsoft, because she said that, part of Microsoft's commitment to this market is that they recognize that it's not perfect today. They recognize that there is a risk. They're building in buffers in their investments and their actions.
Great.
To be able to manage unexpected and uncertainties. And I think that's sort of an approach that we all need to take. We can't ask for a perfect accounting system where, countries are doing their corresponding adjustments when it's a country-to-country NDC-related deal. You can't expect that today for corporations. They're not even operating on the same system, so why should they also do a corresponding adjustment credit? And if we can all kind of live with that uncertainty and just accept that it's going to take a little time, but we're moving there, then I think we can actually see a rapid growth of this market in the coming year.
No doubt, I completely agree. I had a conversation with Natalia Dorfman from Kita, and she talked about that very concept of risk. And when you look at financial markets, there's risk-adjusted returns, there's risk mitigation like strategies and processes and insurance. And our market should be no different. And we should encourage those risk mitigation folks and like with that expertise, but those tools to also enter our market and our lexicon. And that's been sorely lacking. And I think that's why we have this response of, oh, you point out a flaw, let's go and fix that flaw. Okay, great. Let's build the foundation. And like you said, understanding that risk exists in everything in life. There's a risk every time you take a plane, every time you take a drive, and every time you take a train, whatever it might be, right? When you go outside, maybe you get stung by a bee. It's how do you mitigate risk? And so you have strategic sort of processes to mitigate that. You mentioned buffer pools. That's a really strategic, and risk mitigation strategy that exists at the standards. But at a corporate level, I see only the vanguard of like market participants that actually have that in their strategy. Essentially, they should all have buffer pools. Effectively, whatever that might be, let's say it's 120% of their footprint, carry that extra 20% either in case of an indemnification, revocation, country risk, whatever it might be, and be able to carry that volume forward for future years. It's no different to what they do in warehousing of other assets or commodities. And so I think we're seeing that kind of evolution as well.
Yeah.
And maybe technology can play a key role in that.
Yes.
Yes.
Another, to your question earlier on where technology can really play a role. So we talked a little bit now on kind of like demand side. How is it helping both corporates and kind of managing their net zero commitments
and better decision making.
Exactly. Improving decision making. But when we talk to project developers, and you mentioned a couple that you already had on this show, obviously. When we talk to project developers, one thing that they are looking to leverage technology for as a way to kind of set their credits aside and maybe get a premium for being very thoughtful and responsible is this notion of how they are working with the beneficiaries in their community. So there are really smart ways of leveraging, for example, back up a step. If you're doing soil improvements or regenerative ag with smallholder farmers, for example, you want to demonstrate that you give them a fair price. You want to demonstrate that they're getting a fair share of the ultimate cost of the carbon credit that you're generating. And there are all these processes for how to do that appropriately. But now there's also technology where you can show that you're doing it transparently, and you don't have to kind of stand there and be questioned around like the socioeconomic impact. So for example, we have several groups that are using smart contracts. So you create a carbon credit and you upload it to a digital ledger. In this case, many of them are using blockchain, and they embed it in a smart contract where they show that every time this carbon credit is sold, even if it's sold and traded many times, every time you can decide that 20% of the price should be kicked back to the community, and it's baked into the contract of this asset. And that's why I think digital assets are so powerful, in that they can kind of give back the power to the communities who are involved in these projects, versus sort of just hoping for a
better accounting and a better outcome. I completely agree. On smart contracts, so that's a really important point that I think oftentimes gets lost in the weeds. When I look at renewable energy certificate markets or RECs, there are smart contracts in place. These power purchase agreements, these virtual power purchase agreements are in place. They're essentially smart contracts. And what they do is they reduce again the barrier of entry. So the corporates make these long-term commitments. They have security on the offtake, right? That's why you make an offtake. But in terms of the delivery, you actually smooth out the cash flow, like hits. And oftentimes right now, transactions are done in carbon markets in lumps. They're done on an annualized basis. Many of the clients that I worked with over the last decade plus, I help to advise them on, hey, why don't we actually reduce the cash flow hits? So why don't we structure the deliveries over a quarterly or monthly even basis? And oftentimes it's a push and pull with companies, but if you could do that on a digital ledger effectively, and you could structure that smart contract in one hit, but effectively take delivery over time, it actually becomes almost imperceptible in terms of the cost. It just goes into the cash flow management systems and like the account receivables and payables. Like it's actually fine. It's just like it speaks their language as well. So carbon should actually do that same sort of thing.
Absolutely, and I've had so many conversations with, Chandra is such a thought leader at the World Bank,
he's
obviously.
Amazing. He's the oracle.
Yes, I know. He's the OG, the true OG.
Yeah, he's the true OG.
And in his vision for a digital end-to-end carbon market, it goes exactly to that.
Yeah.
It's just leverage the efficiencies we have in digital. And again, like it's not like we need that for everything.
No.
This personal conversation is more impactful than any technology could make.
No doubt. People do business with people, and that I don't think is going to be usurped by artificial intelligence and people that are worried, they'll lose their jobs. No, I just think it empowers people to have great leverage. But you're right. Like, why don't we just smooth out some of that transactional, just dysfunction that exists in the markets through technology? It would be really, really important.
Someone talked to me yesterday about the impact of debt to nature swaps.
Yes.
And there's, fascinating instrument, very promising, but currently only limited to very large capital providers, right?
Yes.
And it's a very complicated way to structure it and organize it. What if you could put them on a digital ledger and you can break them down into fractional pieces so that people, anyone could contribute to a small little piece. Like I would be willing to contribute to, obviously it would be a tiny fraction with what I can afford, but
sure,
still,
but that mass,
to signal that I care about this, I would like to help enable more debt to nature swaps, and then kind of fractionalize the cost or the big ticket item. I think the other piece that a lot of groups are talking about is fractionalizing carbon credits, so you can bake them into
the actual goods, point of sale.
Or exactly, point of sale, or even a supermarket that wants to demonstrate that they're adhering to their net zero pledges or kind of negative carbon footprint pledges. They could bake in a fraction of a little carbon credit to all of their products.
And the fractionalization on a digital ledger can actually fractionalize it to a millionth of a ton. So essentially you're talking grams of CO2, and then that, as long as you have a really strong life cycle analysis, can be embedded. Those smart contracts is a clear opportunity for how we can engage with the Web 3.0 kind of ecosystem to help the scale. And I think that democratization, that fractionalization is really interesting because, like you said, it becomes very small transactions. But if you just take bips on each transaction and then you look at the aggregate, it is significant in terms of the quotient. Instead of having to have one giant warship of some debt finance kind of play, right? It could be large banks or private equity or whoever it might be, sort of in this space. Where those big tickets take a long time to actually gestate and actually execute, you could have millions, if not billions, of transactions that could aggregate to the same sum, but over a much quicker time frame. And I think that's where you're talking about impact. That's really important. So we should be looking at those technologies. So that's great. Okay, so Anna, maybe you could give me some of your parting thoughts. Right, we talked a pretty diverse conversation around lots of different technology sort of inputs with regards to the market as it continues to evolve. Yeah. What are some of your parting thoughts?
Well, I say this a lot, but for me, climate is a time game, and we are losing the game.
Yes.
We're really not moving fast enough. We need way more money. We need way more people to be engaged. We need everyone to think of their job as a climate job. From my vantage points, I think that digital technologies and data can really help us accelerate the pace of progress.
Yes.
It's not going to solve it all, but it's really powerful and really impactful tools to make us do more things in a smarter way, in a more cost-effective way, and move a little faster. So, I'm just very grateful for you for doing this, for sharing thoughts. I think it's so important. As a climate community manager myself, it is really important work, and it's often ungrateful. So we are very grateful to you.
It's my honor. Like, honestly, this is. I talk about paying it forward with my team all the time. I'll happily mentor you, I'll happily develop you, but you have to make a promise that you pay it forward. This is my paying it forward moment for an industry that I love and I'm passionate about. And essentially, it's been really good to me, and I've had incredible lifelong relationships being built through clients and colleagues. And I want to effectively provide a platform that enables incredible people like yourself to be able to communicate that passion and distribute to an audience. And then with hopefully it actually creates this cascade effect, right?
Yes.
Where other people then feel motivated to then take on that kind of challenge effectively, like you said. Every job is a climate job. Where can you make impact in order to effectively mitigate the worst effects of climate change?
Yes.
And that's my little bit. Hopefully it's a ripple in the ocean.
That's amazing. We're super grateful. And if you work on climate tech or nature tech, and you're looking for a community that will help you, support you, lift you, mentor you, and encourage you, find us. We're the Climate Collective, and we're here to support innovation and startups working in this space.
Great. Thank you so much, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you once again. It's an absolute honor to actually sit down with you, and hopefully we can do this again.